Maganda umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning, everyone. This video is my swan song or farewell to Proxmox. Maybe not a permanent farewell, but I'm going to be taking it off of my VM servers here in another month or two. It has been an interesting run with Proxmox these past 6 months, but it is time to pack it up and move on. To be clear, Proxmox is a great product for managing your virtual machines, and I can technically do everything I want or need to do, well, for the most part. My issues with Proxmox are centered more around my workflow and how I like to do things. For me, using Proxmox in my current setup, things don't quite mesh up with the way I want them to, so moving on. I told myself I would give it 6 month trial period, and I did, and I found that Proxmox does a lot of things very well. Yes, it does, and some things it just does okay. Well, different strokes for different folks, and Proxmox will be fine for a lot of people. However, at this current point in time, not for me. Maybe if my home lab's situation changes in the future, I'll go back to Proxmox. But right now, I'm going to be packing things up in a couple months because I'll be heading back to the United States. Not sure how long yet, but I'll be there for at least 3 months. We'll have to see how things go there. So my first issue or item or whatever you want to call it, my home lab setup is not really a setup where Proxmox shines. I could honestly say there would be other setups where Proxmox would be a desired choice. But let's face it, I'm using 3 mini PCs, well, 2 of them technically, and a couple of them are kind of old to make my Proxmox cluster. I got a Raspberry Pi 3B from it's a 3B Plus from the 2018. Nook, 8th generation Nook with an Intel i5 from 2020, and B-Link Series 6 Max, which is from 2023 and is a newer computer, but like I say, 2 of them are kind of dated. Technically, the Pi is there just so I have a third computer in the cluster. Not really required for operation of Proxmox, but Proxmox uses at least 3 PCs in a cluster for proper voting on what to do when things go sideways with your cluster, and that's basically the only reason the Pi is there. At this point in time, I do not have any mass storage devices, and what I mean by a mass storage device would be something that holds 4+ hard drives or storage drives. Best I can do right now is 2 drives in one device. But like I say, if I would like to get a mass storage device with maybe 4 to 8 drive slots, in which case I think Proxmox would be a real possibility in that case, because it does have some very good tools and features for working with large storage arrays. Aside from my hardware setup not being optimal for Proxmox, there are some idiosyncrasies which I find annoying. None of them are deal breakers except when I couple them with the current hardware, at which point, yeah, we'll do something else. So back when I first started using virtual machines, I was running a number of mini computers, and I do mean a number. In fact, I've still got a lot of them sitting in a drawer down here. Since none of them were running at anywhere near capacity, virtualization seemed to be a good way to reduce the number of computers, as well as allowing me to remove an entire switch from my network. I have been running VirtualBox on my laptop for a while now, and while I like VirtualBox interface, I do have ongoing issues with the virtual machine boot times and overall responsiveness. I have been told by multiple sources that this is not the case anymore, but I have yet to see it. Anyway, it's not a big deal since I am not doing anything time critical with VirtualBox on my laptop. When I decided to set up virtualization on my home lab, I started with Virsh, VIRSH, controlled through SSH. I will admit that there was a bit of a steep learning curve there, and it is a command line program that is not going to be for everyone. I did play around with VirtManager for a while. It's more intuitive than Virsh, but still has a bit of a steep learning curve. After hearing many fanboys rave about the benefits of Proxmox, I decided to give it a try. My initial experiments on a test computer were fairly positive with a few exceptions. Some things I found fairly straightforward and easy to do. However, I found as many things that I felt were not directly obvious or somewhat convoluted in how you did them. But couple of hours on a test machine does not really lead to a fair evaluation, so I went ahead and built a 3-computer cluster. Now, again, technically a 2-computer cluster. I'm actually using virtualization I promised myself I'd do it for 6 months, and I've done it for 6 months. Technically, like I said, I'm going to take it down in a month or two. It'll be 7 or 8 months, but yeah, I'll be moving away, at least with my current hardware setup, from Proxmox in the future. So I just really can't leave it at that. I need to say something about whys and hows. I mean, it's sort of vague, and I'm probably going to be a little vague here since this is basically an opinion video and not really a tutorial of any sort. There are a lot of tutorials out there for setting up Proxmox, and it really was not that hard to get a few virtual machines up and running. In many cases, the tutorials focused on getting the VM or virtual machine up and running, and they sometimes were a little lacking in explanations of what specific steps were for what they were doing, and this is okay for most people's initial work. However, my experience so far is that Proxmox has a hockey stick learning curve once you get beyond the basics. That is to say, the basics are fairly shallow learning curve, but once you get beyond that, it becomes really steep. To be fair, advanced virtualization is a complex issue, even in Virsh or Manager also, but in my case, at least with Virsh, I was starting from the expectation of complexity and the fact that I was going to be using the command line. My recommendations, if you are starting with Proxmox, is that you dry run a few tutorials before you build your first VM. After making a number of VMs, I can say that most of the process is obvious now. However, I did experience some struggles with certain aspects. And coming from a VirtualBox environment, some things were downright counterintuitive. And, well, let me give you an example of one that stumped me early on. So in VirtualBox, when one creates an EFI EFI VM, VirtualBox maintains a software emulation of the EFI's firmware. In Proxmox, when you create an EFI virtual machine, you will be asked to create an EFI disk. My initial thought was, why? In VirtualBox, you create an EFI partition on your disk, not a separate disk. Now, I'm not 100% sure I fully understand the implementation or explanation here, but Proxmox creates the EFI firmware as a disk, where VirtualBox has the emulation software built in. So for an EFI virtual machine, you need an EFI disk and an EFI partition in Proxmox. While it makes a certain amount of sense now, the explanations I was reading at the time were not really telling me what I needed to know, or they probably were, I just was not understanding them properly. Another issue for me was figuring out the Proxmox defaults. To most people, this is probably not going to make much of a difference, if any at all, but I like to know things like this and where my files are being stored and how I can change some of these things more to my liking. For example, by default, Proxmox stores your virtual machines and containers in a directory /var/lib/vz most of the time. This can get a little bit confusing when you're using things like LVMs and thin provisioning, be that as it may. But call me unconventional, but I would rather they all be located in the /srv/vz folder. And yes, you can change this, but it is not as simple as clicking on a setting menu item and selecting a new storage location. And no, it does not affect performance in any way. It is a personal preference. And like I say, a lot of these things are going to be personal preferences for me. They may not apply to you. If one is happy with the defaults, that is well and good. If one is not happy, changing them in some cases can be somewhat complex. Here's another one that really bugged me too, and this one will cause many people to go ballistic. One should limit the use of the root account as much as possible. Guess what? Proxmox, to achieve full functionality, wants you to log in as root. You security experts, let that sink in for a few minutes. While not a security nanny, I do have issues with root login. On a private LAN, local area network, where one has complete control, it is not much of a security issue. The big issue comes from novice users doing something they cannot recover from. That's the big problem with logging in as root. However, for remote public access, say that coffee shop down the street, I take issue with using root. I can hear the fanboys now going over the list of things you can do to improve security for remote root access. However, these are all above and beyond the simple Proxmox installation, therefore additional complexity. Really, if one is designing a system that supports remote login, one should require unprivileged users and within the program provide methods to elevate privileges when needed. On the upside, if you are not remoting in from your local coffee shop Wi-Fi and only accessing your server locally, it's not really a big problem. Yes, I know some of you security experts will disagree with that statement, but oh well. Some other issues I had deal with hardware pass-through, and this was actually not on my servers in any way. I was going to redo my laptop, and I was debating installing Proxmox and doing 2 virtual machines, one for Windows, one for Linux. And I normally dual boot, but I thought I'd give Proxmox a try, so I played around with it for a couple days. And one of the things I found overly complex was hardware pass-through. To be fair, this is not just a Proxmox issue, as you will see it with any other hypervisor, and the process can vary somewhat from manufacturer to manufacturer. What may be an issue is once you pass something through, you lose access to it from the host PC or from any other virtual machines. As an example, let's say you want to run, like say, Proxmox on your main PC so you can run multiple operating systems without dual booting. As I tried to do, you had better have multiple GPUs installed. Luckily, my laptop has 2 GPUs. As soon as you pass one through to the virtual machine, unless there's another one available, you will lose video on your main host PC. And I passed my NVIDIA card through and I did lose access to that, but I still had the Intel built-in graphics. Again, I just tested this briefly, as it does not really affect what I am doing with the home lab, as it's a separate computer. And I found I was better off dual booting and had better functionality that way. So in conclusion, it is not my intent to bash Proxmox. Rather, I'm saying that it is just not right for my current use case. If I had a different setup, I would be more inclined to use Proxmox. My main reason for making this video, I see lots of people extolling the virtues of Proxmox without any caveats whatsoever that it might not be the preferred solution for everyone. Proxmox is a great application and you can do great things with it, but it does have its issues and it does not universally apply in every situation. It may or may not be the best solution. My suggestion to those thinking about giving it a try, if at all possible, set Proxmox up in a test environment first. It might be very well be the best solution for your needs or your preferences, but it's always nice to know for certain first. And again, like I say, Proxmox is a great program. If I was using say a NAS device or a computer with 4 to 8 hard drives, I think I would probably run Proxmox on it, but again, doesn't fit my current situation. That doesn't mean it isn't going to work for you. So everybody should evaluate their own situation. After you listen to the fanboys, do your own testing and come to your own conclusions, okay?